This lecture was given by Father Paul of the Holy Order of Anne's on August 1st, 1968. This lecture can also be heard on tape number 606.
Someplace. And the topic is the soul. Now, this is probably the most unused topic of the whole metaphysical field. And yet, when you come to think of this, this is the whole kernel of what you're working for. Because the soul is the shell, or the perimeter, so to speak, of the self, and it is the recording wire on which all your experiences are recorded. It is also the place where the motor system has all its records, so that your heart will beat, your lungs will breathe in the air and vital forces of the universe, and that you will remember, even though you don't physically, the entire past incarnation and cycles of life which you have gone through since you left the womb of nature, or the womb of the Father. This all-encompassing record is the thing that is talked less about and known less about than any other part of human organism, and yet we go through all kinds of sad experiences and all kinds of joyous experiences for the sake of getting this in balance with the true self. Now, this is expressed in all kinds of words. That is, there are Sanskrit, there are the Latin terms, the Greek terms, and a half a dozen others. And through interpretation, one hardly knows whether they're talking about the soul or the spirit. And of course, some of the authors whom are interested in selling books for words, and by the word, have used this particular facet of the definition in order to sell many words. So we did a bit of research, which took 4 or 5 weeks, of various fields and authors, and then condensed this down to the reality of things. The Hindu goes into the use of the centers and chakras, but says not too much about the soul, except some things regarding the emotions that we might feel, but doesn't get too far in detail as to what the function of this organ is. Of course, they do not, except in the higher work anyway, get too much into the function of the body. They kind of forget this because it's sort of a dirty thing. But it isn't true, and it's part of God's creation. And if you don't have a good body, you're not going to have very much chance of getting any real spiritual development. And that is why the misuse and disregard of the physical body is just as sacrilegious in reality as the disregard for your prayers, your way of prayer, regardless of what it is, or your disregard for the Creator. One is just as sacrilegious as the other. And so that's why we are truly concerned about this, and we are writing 4 or 5 lessons on it. And I thought, while I was doing this, and while it fits in perfectly with the regular Thursday night group meeting in the work of evolution and the initiation, that tonight I would bring this together. Now, anybody that has a question as I read along here and give some other expressions, why, just hold up your hand if you have a question, and we'll attempt to answer the question. As man evolves, the direction of the soul force changes. Now, many people in many schools will talk to you about the Kundalini, and they'll talk about the control of the chakras and all of these terms, and they'll spend many volumes in doing this. In reality, the force from the soul, which has been collected there and which comes out of the very kernel of the seed atom, is within it. And if you have ever found the self and have seen it, not been told that you have seen it or been told that you've realized, but actually seen it, you'll know that out of this very kernel, this very center, comes a tremendous amount of power. In some of the expressions of those whom are trying to put across what they have seen without any particular physical relationship, they will tell you that when the power of the soul rises to the brain, and they speak as if the soul was being relocated in the brain, then man starts to see in a spiritual way. Well, this is not true. There's quite a little bit goes on before this happens. Then you'll hear another series of expressions. In fact, you could read a whole book on it, and that is about meditation on the centers. Now, the soul of man is around the self and is located in what you might call the rear of the abdomen. You call it this because it shows up in the physical there, but actually sits in the spiritual body of man. And due to the fact that the entire solar plexus and the nerve ends of all the automatic nerve systems of the body ends in this great chakra or solar plexus, here is where the energy is picked up that they're talking about. And as it travels up through the nerve system, and the one which has gotten more people in trouble in development than any other, and that is the vagus nerve, which leads through the center of the body and goes to each one of the organs. There's an offshoot to it. That is why people, when they go into deep meditation with very weak bodies, have a great deal of trouble, and sometimes get in serious physical trouble. But as this radiating energy out of the self, being screened by its type through the experience and the, you might say, memory of the entire lifetimes, is picked up by the nerve system. It then moves up the spine, and as it comes in contact with the chakras, that is the locations of them, they respond the way they should. And in this order, maybe we're kind of lazy, you know, but in this order, we sort of disregard the chakras and leave that up to something that knows a little more how to work with them and how they will work than we do. So we allow these chakras to be run by the intelligence of our soul, and we keep our hands out of it. We don't meditate on them, we don't concentrate on them, we don't try to spin them, and we don't try to control them that way. We let the light and the Christ intelligence that comes through the soul and through the self control these things. And consequently, many of those who come through into illumination, in the first parts of illumination, have never even, I can say that there's some here perhaps who have never even read anything about a chakra. they haven't had very much trouble about it either, getting through. So you see, nature and God, the Creator, or the great intelligence, or Allah, or you call him what you want to, has provided a foolproof system, providing you don't stick your fingers into it. Again. And these chakras are there, there's no question about this, and they have a purpose. They are part of an electromagnetic field balance, and they have to do with the heart and the thyroid and the abdullah, where the sorting mechanism goes on for the thoughts coming in, going out. And in this way, when we leave them alone, everything stays in balance. And then what takes place is the fact that they abridge the pineal and pituitary, and then we have a light which comes in. Some people talk about it as a light in the head. Other people say they see it somewhere else first. Some people say they see it out in front of them. Well, this is a matter of a certain amount of it is their consciousness, or where they're projecting their consciousness, so to speak. But it can be seen where it is natural and its normal place of location. And it will eventually get there during the development. So you see, this spiritual framework of function is just as much a part of the physical controls of the body, and it is just as orderly as our automatic nerve system is, or our motor nerve system. And it has created into it certain methods of safety, and their ways of moving and controlling them. That's what they mean by the soul force changes and moves upward, having been hitherto relatively equiescent. Well, now, this they mean by this is something that has been absorbed and is really not a conscious function, but you admitted in some respects it was there, and so a certain amount of absorption took place and was thrown into the physical and into the consciousness of the individual from the spiritual body. The soul force in the centers at the base of the spine is carried to the head via the spinal canal, passing through each center in turn and gathering and increasing the soul energy at each point. You see, this man who wrote this saw something, but he didn't go quite far enough, because he says the base of the spine. Well, there's some that feeds in there from the coccygeal nerve, of course, but of course he stopped there. He wasn't able to go back into the spiritual body of man and see the actual original contacts and the source. And he probably was a very wonderful person and could do a great deal for God, but somehow or other we here in this school, we're not satisfied with that, because we know God has an orderly system of creation, and if it doesn't tie up with something, then we know we haven't gone all the way down the track to follow it to its source. And this man didn't follow it to its source. He only went so far and then stopped. And this is true. There would be energy coming in there at the base of the spine, but it would be through the coccygeal nerve. And here, he would only be picking up a very little bit, and he might find a little light there. This is true. Now, I couldn't tell you at this moment who made some of these quotations, and I'm not interested in it, because we cut off all record as to where they came or from what books they came out of. Whether it was out of the Kabbalah or out of whose teaching, it doesn't make any difference. Because we will not quote somebody else directly, and we would not criticize somebody else directly, or anything of the sort here. But we will use their work and correct it because we know that we can see and we can follow things through to the source, and then we know that when we state it, it is an absolute fact. When the soul becomes enthroned in the head, it attracts upward to itself through the power of magnetism, the force latent at the base of the spine. Thus it produces a complete blending of spiritual energy and force in matter itself through the attractive energy of the soul. This is a correct way, and not by meditation and consciously from any specific center. He has a very complete way of sort of saying this, but of course he missed the original source, but he does bring out a point which many do not bring out, and that is metabolism of the physical body and its radiation that comes out. And this isn't any hypothetical thing. This is real. It can be measured. I've seen it done in the laboratory. Does and is absorbed by the forces coming through the spine and is absorbed by the spinal forces. And this does build up part of the magnetism, and he used the word magnetism correctly because it's another type of force. It's all the same force, of course, originally anyway, but it takes on the character of a different function. And here, the magnetic forces assemble with that which comes out of the spine, and they do certain things. For instance, they are used in healing, and can be used in healing. In the laying out of hands, one can heal this way with magnetic forces. And that is the way this is developed, this strength. And a great deal of this energy comes out of the body itself, and its original source is through the normal functions of the body. The soul energy and the sacral centers must be carried to the highest active point, and then he mentions that one is at the throat, and the energy of the solar plexus must be transferred to the heart, providing the person isn't bound by some block of selfishness. And he's quite right here, absolutely, because the energy does rise, and you can, if you stay and work on the solar plexus entirely, you are going to eventually have some real problems because your emotions will become uncontrollable. Where if you allow yourself to let go and let God, the forces will rise to the heart to a certain extent. But in the normal way, you don't have to play with it. And then the throat center that he mentions here, which is the thyroid center, is very definitely a functional part because it is the balancing valve between the spiritual body and the physical. Now, this is a very normal thing which is agreed on by many men, and which we see, of course, too, and have worked with. If you had two water systems set up here with a bunch of pipes, and you had a feed in and a release, and you wanted to keep these two systems with a water level just the same in them, you'd have a balancing valve, a two-way valve in here. And if the pressure raised up here, it would release and allow the pressure to come up here. And a regular balancing valve, you might call it, in a water system, could be put in there. And this is the same between the spiritual and the physical body. There is a balance of energy between the physical and the spiritual body, and it is the thing which feeds the cells as they break down in their normal function of the muscles and the tissues and our living action. And this is why this center is so important. We see this when we talk about, oh, don't fuss with him, Mother. He's all right. He cries and wants to have fun. He just did. I've heard a lot of older ones cry, and I couldn't be paying attention to them. The people that will show you this is where they're out of balance is somebody comes along that's about yay big, and you can figure right away that they've got a thyroid that's out of balance because metabolism isn't working properly and digestion and probably the pancreas is out of whack. That's because the thyroid is not working properly. Then you find somebody as you come along the way and you look at them and they make a shadow about that wide, and you know that they've got a hyperthyroid, as the medical term would be for it, and you know that their thyroid's out of balance. This center's out of balance here. This center here is out of balance because they're sped up too high, and there's too much flowing in there, and they're activating too much energy all the time. There's no balance between the two functions. In other words, the demand of the body is not being balanced by the spiritual flow into it. In other words, there's more flow in than is actually needed. And this is what we mean by balancing valve. Before this period, most of man's consciousness was centered in the area below the diaphragm. After, this is of course we're talking about the great center here, after it rises to the heart or the throat of the head, we in the Holy Order have understand this, and then it goes directly, we go directly to the meditation on the center in the head itself or within the being, and here it balances. It will balance itself out, and here is where the man, when he finally becomes conscious of God and allows the energy to come right in directly through the great chakra that's called the crown of the head, the place where you had a soft spot when you was born, and this is true. Here the energy will come in, and you will supply yourself as you need once you have gained a real consciousness of the Father and His creative force, and you won't have to worry about anything else. Before this time, when the soul takes command and arouses the pineal gland to a functioning condition, energizing the head center and the positive aspect of it being, this is when you get out of the way. Now, a lot of times people have listened to many quotations about let go and let God, or get yourself out of the way in the course of training and various other things. Well, they didn't realize just how functional these things really were and what they meant. Because as they let go, then they released the blocks that were in the nerves and the spine and in the other centers, and they immediately start to supply and to set up that bridge so that they did start to get a little light, a little understanding, and a little sight. And this is, you see, a great reality. Now, it is much easier for us as we start down the path to understand someone saying to them, well, get out of the way and let it happen, and all that, if we have some idea why we're doing this or what it is for, because otherwise we couldn't very well do it. It would be hard for us to. It's only through discipline and exercise that we can do this. When we understand what is going on, it is a much easier thing to do. In time, a magnetic field is set up, and the soul and the body become saturated with the soul energy. The father and mother come into relation. Now, of course, beforehand, and before this day and time, in this new age, we could take this idea of illumination and put it into a lot of fancy words, and we might be able to keep this running for a long time. There's a real way to keep a gang of young people around you, but in this age we have to produce the efforts and we have to produce the results. So this is why we want everyone to learn to know the reality of the things, and it isn't just somebody's idea, or it isn't just some teacher's particular way. These are the things that the way God created it, and I'll be darned if I'll work that hard to try to change it. And I think all of our teachers will feel the same way about it. In other words, when these two glands are brought into a balance where there is a spark or bridge between them, we then have a male-female function going on. And when the body and the soul, the physical body and the soul, come into contact and there is a spark between them which takes place, that is an interchanging field, in other words. It takes place when the pituitary and the pineal are bridged. Then it is possible for light to be realized. Yes, realized, seen, I think half dozen times. Because why? Because the soul is feeding that light out of the self and it's coming into your body. Now, this is why when you start to gain this control and you're drawing in the magnetic forces and that, also, beside the other, this is when the Master said in his writings, if thine eye be single, thy body will be full of light. Well, when the person keeps their eye and their attention on one particular facet of creation and function, and also the two glands become one in function, then the male-female aspect of the individual comes into perfect balance, and the illumination or the golden wedding takes place. And the energy from the self moves into the physical structure, and the spiritual body is completely filled with this light. And there is no question about the illumination. This isn't something that you have to go into deep meditation to find out if it exists. You'll know it, and it'll show all over you. And you'll have a physical transformation. You have to, when the physical body is filled with light. There has to be a transformation. There isn't any question about this. Now, if there's any questions, why, let us hesitate and answer some of them. Yes.
This last complete transformation, is this what happened with Sanskrit?
What's that?
This would be discussing the whole class.
This is the birth with the Christios. That's right. Golden wedding garment.
What was it that happened at the practice?
This is the sending of the Christios and taking on the full nature and personality of the Christios, the Lord of the Sun. And here he started to function as this, with the knowledge of it.
And then the transfiguration of full realization.
Yes, the ascension. explanation.
You said something you were reading in there, something about the center of being, right?
Center of being, well, the energy rising to the head. Yes. From the solar plexus.
Can you read that again? There are a couple of references to rising to the head. The last one, there's something with the rising to the head, locating something. I think you said something about maybe
Oh, I said that.
Locating in the being.
No, I said that when they're in balance.
The great chakras.
I said that when it rises, when this rises, when the person starts to gain this light, in time, is this what you mean? In time, a magnetic field is set up. The soul and the body become saturated with the soul energy. Father and mother come into relationship, and the soul is brought to the realization of the consciousness of man. This is the birth of the Christ in the house of God, and the coming into being of the true man, of the true man. Of this, the sex organs and the activity of the physical plane are the outer function. The pituitary body is the seat of the emotional and mental characteristics. In one lobe, the reason, and the other, the imaginative or creative emotion, faculty, and power to visualize. In developing the personality, the two lobes are equal to the demand. Here's where the lobes and the thyroid have their inner control, and it is concerned with the centers. They call it the centers between the brow and this particular thing. Because this is sort of point through here and a point down here, and you strike right where between the pituitary and the pineal gland. Is that what you referred to?
Good.
It was referring to first seeing the self that it has the right mind.
Yeah, there's something there about that. Just before he talks about the opening of the great chakra.
Maybe it isn't in here now. What am I going to do then? Well, I guess it did. We better get that off the tape after that, because I don't see it here. I guess that comes from someplace else. You got me over a barrel now. And the fact of this... Okay. It is down here. And the fact of this relationship is that the interplay between the two produces the shining forth of a light. Many people whom begin to practice spiritual exercise testify to seeing a light sometimes in their head. Kind of lightheaded in that case, huh? A scientist says that, and here's a very interesting thing they say, as above, so below, so we find that as in the individual, so in the other forms of creation. A scientist says that any atom, when stimulated in a certain way, can be made to give off light. In other words, certain frequency and light vibration wavelength. Each different type of atom gives a light peculiar to itself, or has its original characteristic to it. Does this explain the halo which the artist provides for when he paints what he calls a lumen being? Is this the reason why Jesus was shown with a halo, or some of the saints were likewise shown this way? Now, the soul, this will be phase one until we get down through the end. The soul is an infinite instrument or part. It is used. It is the overcoat of the self. It is the part that you take with you. And when you go through transition, that's about all you got left. A person who passes through transition should not be embalmed or cremated for 3 days. And bodies are still tied with a silver cord, so that the physical and the experience of the past life may be retrospected and engraved upon some mechanical difficulties. He's a little mechanic, junior one. Yes. Oh, that's all right. As long as they want to play, I don't care. Because of the finer bodies are still tied with a silver cord to the physical, until the panorama of life passes in review before it is released by the snapping of the cord. For the same reason, a strong drug should not be administered immediately before a person is passing, nor lamentations or sorrow be indulged in any form. It's an important matter and requires the attention of each person who truly wants to help those passing into the next world. They then can reap the complete benefit of their past life. Yes.
What about someone dying in the fire?
Well, that usually is what happens. Fire explosion is what happens when the youngsters, or when the individual is in an explosion or a fire, and they do not submerge from it, and they're completely demolished. Then you'll find a youngster will be born and maybe live for maybe 5 or 6 months or something, and then pass over without any particular reason. And this is because they want to come back to the earth and pick up the record that are still left here, and take them so that they can take them on retrospection. And in other words, they're fulfilling a cycle. It might be 5 or 6 months, or it might be 5 or 6 years, whatever their cycle is. And they probably wouldn't have been in the fire if they'd listened to the voice within. Yes.
Well, when the silver cord is cut by wait 3 days
That is an answer to the question I would not ask in public. When I would not answer. I know it, but I wouldn't do it. I'm not admonishing you for that. But you have to remember you've been in some classes in that public. Science has proven, and this was done in Boston in the medical center, science has proven that something leaves the body at the time of transition by placing the dying body on a very delicate scale balance. A definite weight loss is registered, which is the vital body and the composition of the etheric material, it's sometimes called, or the force of the physical body leaving. This is not the soul alone, because it is also that substance and power which the self is made of, too. Souls related sometimes to the fire element, because some people, when they have gone through realization, have seen a great deal of orange light coming out of it at times, and have immediately attached this element to it. And then also when some people have started to go through realization, they have done a bit of perspiring for 8 or 10 hours, or sometimes 2 or 3 days, according to what the methods of the teacher are. In other words, the radiation from this passing through the physical, which still has some negation on it. Of course, if the individual is properly prepared to go through this by the teacher, they will not experience any long periods of that, but it will only be a short period. And that this is the reaction of vibration of a very high nature passing through substance, which is of a much lower vibration and longer. Particles of the... It was thought at one time by some of the great Greek teachers that particles of the mind and the soul were distributed throughout the body, and that this constantly emanated in the emanation and became replaced by other particles taken in through the breath. Well, this, of course, was not the particles really in that respect, but it was the life force and the vital forces that come in through the breath, but this coming in through the breath was carried through the blood, and here it picked up also the radiation of the characteristics which comes out of the self and the center of life, and thus it was able to be identified this way. There is one mistake that which I related to in the beginning, and that is that the body is made for the soul, and not the soul for the body. And here is a great error that is made by some teachers and some teaching. The soul is not made for, and it is not the product of the body. The source of all vital movement is in the soul, which builds up the machine of the body and allows it to function perfectly throughout its way and maintain it for a time against external influences. And this is where our balance of temperature takes place in the physical organism, through the knowledge and intelligence within the soul itself of the automatic function. One of our scientists has given a rather good, simple form of this. Matter is energy in its densest or lowest form. Spirit is this same energy in the highest or most subtle form, which has taken on the personality of God. So matter is descended, and forms the dense matter, while the spirit, when speaking of vital forces or God force, it is the energy which has ascended and become glorified in a higher realm, or has taken on the God personality. Here's an interesting little excerpt that came out of some of the old writings. St. Gregory, in the 4th century, emphasized the triplicate of the body, soul, and spiritual body as did St. Paul, and he did all of his work in accordance with this, which is very interesting due to the fact that St. Gregory actually was a saint of the Roman Church. So you see, they too knew the great truth, even at that time. The soul is always the great reality, the expansion of one life, which is made up of the electrical forces of nature brought from the power of God and the dense bodies. It is the soul force playing upon the functioning through the etheric or the vital bodies, which evolve the specialized centers in the bodies and which turn the acts upon the dense physical body. Now, I'm not talking about an implement, but turn on the acts, meaning the functions and the controls of these bodies and of the physical. I think we'll take a little break right here, and then I'll go on to the other phase of this, and it's finished. The one thing that has probably been as confusing as any other word in the whole metaphysical realm of things regarding the soul and regarding man's advancement and how he does it and what he develops, and that is the word consciousness. And I tried for some years to get away from this word and couldn't find an English word that would comply with what we were really talking about, because actually it isn't anything to do with knowledge, and all the knowledge in the world will never develop any consciousness, really. It will not put this that we are talking about within the concept of the human brain, or be transmitted by the human brain, rather, or bring one into the understanding of the function of their spiritual being, or develop them into, or bring them to illumination to Christ, or the understanding of God. But the word consciousness is a very difficult word to define. And I think I've found something that tells you half a truth in a word definition. And it is sort of interesting. I may have hashed this up a little bit, but bear with me on it, and I think you'll get something out of it. Consciousness, the coexistence of life, which is endowed with both the negative and positive, which begats, as what the Bible uses the term, begat. You remember, this one begat that one, and then the other one begat the next one, and so on down through 48 generations, and so on and so forth. So I use this word begats because it condensed the functional idea into one word. Life, which is endowed with both the negative and positive, which begets. And, begets. The substance, which conceives, produces from the reluctant interaction that which we call consciousness or soul thinking. Soul thinking. The coexistence of life, which is endowed with both positive and negative, which begets substance, which conceives, produces from the reluctance Remember, I'm using this word now in a technical way. The reciprocal of resistance, you might say, in a way. And it's interaction, that which we call consciousness or soul thinking. Now, what do you do when you think with your soul? Well, for one thing, you've gotten the mind quiet. For the second thing, that which you are experiencing will be written into the soul, and when you ask for an answer or a direction, then the soul itself has the ability to think in accordance with that which you have set up for meditation, or the answer to what you want, or the instructions that you're seeking from within. In other words, it is a thinking between the soul and the mind, which is a creative being, which is a creative factor or tool. But it doesn't necessarily function and bring something into creation unless the law is applied. And you say this or you declare it. For in meditation is a very active thing rather than an inactive thing. Now, some people have the idea that meditation is sitting down and doing nothing for hours at a time. Well, meditation is really one of the most active things that a being can be engrossed in, because he is saying to the soul and the self that I am looking for information on this, and at the same time he's saying to the greater intelligence, if it isn't down there, let's get it through. We've got a call and a need up here someplace, and so I'm going to stop all the machinery and all the sorting mechanism, and I'm going to open the channel and let you come through. I have stopped thinking. You know what I want. I put it in the IBM machine. Now I want the answer. And so he stops thinking, but he doesn't blank out his mind, because if he does blank out his mind, the vibrations can't come through because there isn't any feedback there. And so he sits there and the mind is actively alive, and his whole system is functioning. And if that answer is in the self or in your soul, through your experience, it will come through. And it will be in your consciousness. And you won't think it, it will be there. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to come out in red letters and capitals or some other specific form of writing or something of that nature, but it may come out in any one of a half a dozen different ways, according to your personality and what fits and what's going to work the best with you. And that is the soul thinking, or this is what produces your consciousness in the soul. Now, that definition isn't too complicated, and if we need any evaluation on it, I'd be glad to give it. because this is a mechanized answer, so to speak. It's functional. It isn't just a total blank of something that is indeterminate. And it gives one the opportunity of understanding what he's really doing. So what he's looking for. Now, man has two kinds of consciousness, really, and they are both the products of what we're talking in reality. It is a form, one would call it, of reasoning consciousness, and this is still in the category of this particular function. And reasoning consciousness is where we don't try to evaluate something, really. What we take from memory and experience, and we evaluate it only with the creative laws which we know are infallible. And there are infallible laws, just a few of them, but not many. And this is a form of reasoning consciousness because it is guided by the inner knowledge, the inner wisdom of the individual. It is not a logical thing, because you can come up with what would be considered the most illogical answers, and you'll find that if you test them out, they're true. Because they are answers which are active and retroactive in the spirit, which is oftentimes in appearance opposite to what it is on the earth plane. But there is nothing imperfect in it. It is just that we are looking to it as if we were seeing it in a mirror. Then there is what we call divine consciousness, and this is when we pull all stops, get everything we've ever known and thought of out of the way, and we just we don't ask any particular question, maybe. We just get ourselves and our mind alive, and then we stop all the other thinking mechanisms and all the other consciousness, or looking to the self for the answer or anything else, and we open the line wide open, and then the things come directly in, right from the core of creation. Then we'll get nothing but things, usually but things of the upper level of vibration, or the heaven worlds, or something to do with creation directly, or guidance of things that are beyond the earth plane. And this is where when we read from it and we get something from it we know, or absolutely we don't need to think about it. So these are really the two forms of consciousness. Now, the divine, of course, has nothing to do with the physical in itself, but in the immaterial consciousness, or what we call a reason consciousness, there enters into the body a birth, and there is a flood of energy comes into the self and the soul, and we have also the speech into the body. This is what can take place with such things as when Paul gained his illumination and realization on the road to Damascus, when that bolt of lightning hit him and really did the job right up in one fell swoop. And he had some difficulties for a few days afterwards, that's for sure. but it all worked out. And this is what can happen when we go into this sort of thing. And we never try to go into this unless we're ready to let go of the whole works and forget all about what we think. Of course, that's one of our greatest troubles. We're always thinking. The soul has its memory and its consciousness. That consciousness has nothing to do directly with the physical side of life, but the greater divine scheme of things. In other words, it's the pattern of the divine creation of the soul that's in the soul that actually runs the physical body and its automatic mechanism. The original sin of man's part is the failure to recognize the divine consciousness in his soul. Man is neither a living being nor a living material expression, but a living soul. Man is of the consciousness of God and of the expression of matter. He is infinite with God, and all that he has is infinite when he is with God. He has the shell or container and the association or environment, but he is the soul into which God breathes the breath of life. All organic beings have a principle of self-determination, to which the name soul is generally given. This is a self-determination. In other words, it is like a code number which relates to a certain pattern in a computer. And it is your identity, and it always will be, because you will always carry it with you throughout your entire existence. And through all of the many volumes and volumes and more volumes of metaphysical writings and translations, it takes a lot of scraping and a lot of doing to find out any expression about the soul, because they haven't been thorough enough and gone into their own records and got into the records of the Father in order to correlate some of the experiences that they have had while they were experiencing the presence of God. And this is why we here in the order stress very strongly keep away from interpretation until you have examined all of the facts and all of the experiences and shaken them down together. And they must, what we find, must conform to the basic law of creation, and they must be constructive and have a creative function, or otherwise we know that something is wrong in our findings. They must have safety valves, and they must have safety devices in all of their functions if they are right. Because God never created anything that couldn't function by itself, with the exceptions of one thing in man's life, and that is he is not complete until he has found his true mate and functions with her, both in the material world and in the spiritual. Because here are the two souls coming together in perfect balance. Outside of that, man has all the tools to live a very happy and a very contented and very fruitful life. So if you find something in your experience, or you see something, or have some phenomenal manifestation which has a detrimental angle to it, go back and examine it and find out if it checks out with the basic laws of creation. And if it does, then look again, because you've missed a factor someplace. You've missed something, or it would not have an opening for you to make a mistake in. The eternal laws are never wrong and never change. It is only the evolution of the experiences we get out of them that change. It is only the creations which we create and the advancement of our physical bodies that change. But the basic laws, they are not going to change, because if they did, we would have to change the law of cause and effect. And then surely we know the whole universe, our whole solar system at least, would fly apart. And we would have a mess which no computer could straighten out. There are people I know oft times that rebel at the use of the word infallible. But it can only be used when it comes to the principles of creation and the definite one or two laws of God. And there isn't any question about this. And the only reason that you get something different in your seeking than the next man is the fact that you are you and he is another individual. And that these same laws are at the same base, but they manifest through your personality, which is in the soul. And I think that will wind up tonight's little session, except one thing. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Okay, no?
If you specify this kind of meditation,
No, a consciousness, I said. There are two factors, two polarities of consciousness. Only one kind of meditation, one kind of concentration. You mean our regular practice? There's only one type of meditation and one type of concentration. When you go beyond that, you're doing contemplation. There's a combination, really, of both of these things. Reality.
you can't really go into contemplation doing meditation.
No. It won't work. Because you have to have absolute control. Your mind.
And what do you think is kind of like nothing else?
What do you mean, contemplation?
No.
Oh, you mean otherwise?
You don't have control. You're down into a
Well, it's sort of a sleep state, yes. Well, this is what he's talking about is when a person has learned to meditate and he hasn't learned the use of both meditation and concentration together actively, knowingly, and very much conscious of it, that very often in meditation you slip deeper into it, into the meditation, and then go into a state, if you get quite far down the line in meditation quite deeply, you go into a sort of semi-sleep state. This is a state which you might say you're sort of partly out of the body, partly in it. And you're not really asleep, you're not really awake, but you're just kind of between here and there in a total static condition, sort of semi-static condition. Not when you're under the guidance of Northern Health. Yes.
In this great thing, don't really rise too far above kind of a psychic type thing.
No. You wouldn't, because you can't. When you go above this, you really have to either project yourself out or move out, one or the other. And of course, this is not very difficult to compensate as far as that's concerned. Once the body is clean and in shape, got the strength enough and power enough to do it. But some people try this when they don't have good, clean bodies, and then they have troubles. That's always the case. Any other questions? There is one statement that I'll add to this. Of course, I've only used a couple of pages of notes. I could give 4 or 5 more lectures in. But this is basic, what I've given you, not the ramifications or the out-picturing of the phenomena of function. But there is one thing that you can always bank on. Thank you. There's one thing you can always bank on. In any faith, religion, cult, anything in this nature whatsoever, if it won't stand scientific probing of the normal, healthy mind, and the facts which are given you do not tally or coordinate with the basic facts of science, then you better look again, because I think that you'll find that what you are being told, there's some particular facets of fallacy. And if you want to check what is said tonight regarding the automatic systems of the body, you may go and get a Gray's Anatomy, if you would, and you can check the systems of the vagus nerves and the automatic nerve system, and you'll find them exactly as I have given them. Because God created it, not me. And I'm not going to try to change it. Not now. We do change these things, and we have in the past centuries. We have removed a stomach from our own body. We have removed a number of things from our body. When man develops, the Father created, but as man evolves, he develops his own vehicle, the form for it. The creation is done by the power of the Father and the intelligence of the hierarchy. Okay? God bless you all.